You're standing in the middle of your kitchen right now, and there is no room left. Every drawer is jammed, every shelf is doubled up. You turn around and your elbow knocks something off the counter again. And you think the problem is that your home is too small. It isn't. I'm going to tell you something that took me 40 years to understand. The problem was never the size of the room. The problem is that nobody ever taught you how poor people used to store a whole life inside 4 small walls and do it neatly. I learned this the hard way, in a rented room barely bigger than a closet, when I had almost nothing and needed every inch to count. The tricks I'm about to give you were common knowledge 100 years ago, in houses smaller than your living room, filled with more people than you'd believe. Then we got sold bigger houses, bigger closets, and plastic bins by the truckload, and all of it quietly buried the old know-how that cost nothing. Stay with me, because near the end I'm going to hand you a storage method straight out of a 1943 wartime housekeeping guide, a method the government actually printed and mailed to ordinary families when there was nothing to spare. It uses things already sitting in your home tonight. It cost you not one single dollar, and it works whether you've got money in the bank or you're counting the days until the next check comes in. I was broke when I first tried it, dead broke, and it changed how I lived in a small space forever. Let me take you back to that little room I told you about. I was a younger man and I'd hit a wall in my life. I had one window, a bed, a hot plate, and more belongings than the space could ever hold. Every night I'd move a stack of things off the bed to sleep, and every morning I'd move 'em back. I thought I was just cursed with too much stuff and too little room. Then an old woman who lived down the hall knocked on my door. She was near 80, and she'd grown up in the 1930s, in a farmhouse where 9 people shared 3 rooms. She looked at my mess for about 10 seconds, and she said something I've never forgotten. She said, "You're storing everything flat, son, like the world is a table. Poor folks learn to store the air." Store the air. I didn't understand it yet, but here's what she meant, and here's the first thing I need you to see. In your home right now, look up. Look at the wall above every door. Look at the empty vertical space between your countertop and your cabinets. Look at the dead air under your bed, over your bed, behind every door that swings open. In a small home, the floor is already spoken for. The treasure is in the vertical space and the forgotten gaps, and almost nobody uses them, because for the last 50 years we were told the answer to clutter was to buy a bigger container and set it on the floor. That old woman showed me the truth. She took a single wooden board, no wider than my hand, and she mounted it high on the wall, just below the ceiling, running all the way around the room. In her childhood they called it a plate rail, or a shelf rail, and every farmhouse had one. Up there went everything you needed but didn't touch every day. The floor stayed clear. The room breathed. Suddenly my closet-sized room had a whole storage level I'd been ignoring, floating over my head the entire time. I want you to understand how far back this goes, because it tells you how deep the knowledge runs. The Shakers, a plain and poor religious community in America in the early 1800s, built a strip of wood with wooden pegs all the way around every single room. They hung chairs on the wall. Chairs. When they needed to sweep, up went the furniture onto the pegs, and the floor was bare and clean in seconds. They lived with almost nothing, and kept their spaces so orderly that people travel to see those rooms to this very day, 200 years later. They didn't have money, they had method. So the first tension breaks a little here. You are not short on space. You are short on height usage. But knowing that alone won't save you, because there's a reason this simple wisdom got buried, and once you see who benefited from burying it, you're going to be a little angry. I was. Here's what happened, and this is where it stops being an accident. Somewhere after the Second World War, homes in this country started getting bigger, and the storage industry was born. Think about it. Before the 1950s, the self-storage business barely existed. Today it's a business worth tens of billions of dollars a year, built entirely on the idea that you don't have enough room and the solution is to rent more room somewhere else or buy more plastic to hold what you can't fit. Nobody makes a single dollar when you mount a board on your own wall and store the air for free. Nobody profits when you hang your pots on a rail your grandfather could have built with scrap wood. So the old methods, the vertical thinking, the peg rail, the ceiling shelf, quietly disappeared from how we were taught to live. They were replaced with a picture of success that meant more square footage and more bins to fill it. And the smaller your home, the more they told you that you simply needed to buy your way out of the problem. But you can't buy your way out of a small home. I tried. When I finally had a little money years later, I bought the bins, the racks, the closet systems. You know what happened? I filled every one of them and still had no room, because a container sitting on the floor eats the very thing you're short on. The old woman was right and the catalog was wrong. The answer was never a product. The answer was a way of seeing. Let me give you the next piece, because this one turns your walls into furniture. She taught me about the depth of a door. Every interior door in your home is a flat vertical surface doing exactly one job, swinging open and shut. In the old days, on the back of the pantry door and the cellar door, families mounted narrow shelves, just deep enough for a jar or a can. A single door back could hold 40 or 50 small items, all visible, all reachable, using space that was completely dead a moment before. I did this in that little room with a board and a few nails on the back of my only door. Spices, small tools, my razor, my few bottles, all off the counter, all off the floor, all hanging on a surface I already owned and paid nothing extra for. The counter cleared, and the strange thing, the thing I didn't expect, is what it did to my head. A cleared surface calms a person. When you live in a small space and every flat surface is buried, your mind never rests. Clearing the air cleared me. Now here's the larger tension I promised, the one that pulls you deeper. Even with the walls used and the doors used, most people in a small home are still losing an enormous amount of space to one hidden enemy, and it's not clutter. It's air trapped inside your own belongings, packed the wrong way. And there is an old forgotten method for beating it that predates every closet company alive. Before I give it to you, I need to show you the room where I finally understood it, because that's where the real number lives. The old woman took me to her own room down the hall, and I swear it looked half empty compared to mine, yet she owned more than I did. I asked her how. She opened her closet, and instead of clothes crammed on hangers, crushing each other, taking the full depth of the closet, she showed me things rolled. Not folded flat in stacks that slide and topple. Rolled tight like bedrolls and stood upright in rows, side by side like books on a shelf. This is the trick soldiers and sailors have used for well over a century, because on a ship or in a barracks there is no room to waste. The Navy has been teaching sailors to roll their clothing into tight bundles since the 1800s. A rolled shirt takes far less space than a folded one, it doesn't wrinkle the same way, and here is the part that changes everything. When things stand upright in a row instead of stacking flat, you can see every single one at a glance. You never dig. You never unstack the whole pile to reach the bottom. Nothing gets forgotten and rebought because it was buried at the bottom of a drawer. I rolled everything I owned that night, everything. My drawers, which had been overflowing, closed easily with room to spare. I counted, and I fit nearly twice what I had before into the same 2 drawers. Twice. And I hadn't spent a cent. I'd just stopped storing the air inside my own clothes. Household researchers have actually measured this. University Extension Services, the folks who study home economics for farm and low-income families, have shown for decades that vertical filing of clothing, standing items upright so you see them, dramatically cuts the time you waste searching and the money you waste rebuying things you already owned but couldn't find. The average household loses real money every year, replacing items it already owns, buried, and forgotten. When you can see everything you have, you stop buying doubles. That's money back in your pocket every month, from a trick that costs nothing. But I know what some of you are thinking right now, and I want to speak to you directly, because you're the person I made this for. You're thinking, this is fine for a man with shelves and drawers and doors to work with, but I've got almost nothing. And I can't run out and buy lumber or hire anyone to mount a thing. I hear you. I was you. When that old woman first talked about boards and rails, I had no money for boards. So let me give you the part built for exactly that. The tricks that cost you nothing and use only what is already inside your home tonight. Start with cardboard boxes, the ones you'd throw away. A shoe box, a cereal box cut down, any sturdy box. For generations, poor families used cut cardboard as drawer dividers, and it is still the single best way to organize a chaotic drawer for free. You cut the box into strips, stand them inside the drawer to make little compartments, and suddenly your junk drawer has neat rows. Everything upright, everything visible. That same principle again. The Depression-era households I read about did exactly this. Nothing store-bought. Just yesterday's packaging, given a second life. If this way of thinking speaks to you, the idea that the real answers were always free, hidden in plain sight, passed down by people who had no choice but to be resourceful, then I want you to know I've spent years pulling all of it together in one place. My books, Poor Man Smart, Poor Man Mastery, and Poor Man's System, are written for exactly the person standing in that small kitchen right now, and you can find them linked in the description below. They go deeper than any single video can, covering the full system of old knowledge living that poor and working families kept alive when the modern world wasn't looking. Take a look when you get a chance, and then come right back here, because what comes next is where this really starts to land. Then look at your glass jars. Every empty jar, from pasta sauce, from pickles, from jam, washed out and the label soaked off, is a free storage container that beats anything you can buy. And here is why. You can see straight through it. In the 1930s and 40s, a farm pantry was rows and rows of glass jars, because glass shows you what you have and how much is left. Screws, buttons, dry beans, coffee, rubber bands, spare change, anything small that scatters and gets lost. A wall of clear jars is a wall where nothing ever hides from you again. I keep my odds and ends in jars to this day, and I've bought exactly 0 containers in 20 years. Now the door hooks, without buying hooks. An old woman I knew took the pull tabs off cans, the little metal rings, and used them looped over a nail to hang things in layers, one behind another. You can do the same with the tab from any can. You can bend a sturdy wire hanger, the kind you get free from any dry cleaner, into hooks and holders for 100 small jobs. The wartime guides were full of this, because bending wire was free and buying hardware was not. A single wire hanger can become a hook, a rack, a holder for cleaning gloves over a bucket edge, whatever you need. And here's one that costs nothing and gives you a whole new shelf out of thin air. Take a strong shoebox or a sturdy small box and place it up high, on top of your existing cabinet or wardrobe, in that dead space between the top of your furniture and the ceiling. That gap up there, in most homes, is completely wasted. It's the emptiest space in your house. Box up the things you use twice a year, label them so you know what's inside, and send them up top. You just added storage without adding 1 square inch of furniture and without spending a dime. Every one of those tricks, the cardboard dividers, the glass jars, the wire hooks, the boxes up high, uses only what you already have and would otherwise throw out. That's the heart of poor man's storage. You don't buy your way to order. You see your way to it. And when you start seeing your throwaways as free tools, your whole home changes. Now I want to raise the stakes one more time before I hand you the finale, because there is a deeper cost to living in a cluttered small home, and it isn't only about space. It's about what a crowded room does to a person over time. When I lived buried in that little room, I felt smaller myself. I felt like my life was closing in, like I was failing, because everywhere I looked was pressure and mess. And the day I cleared it with these old free methods, I felt like I'd gotten a bigger life without a bigger home. That feeling is what they really took from us when they sold us the idea that dignity comes in a bigger house with more stuff. It never did. It came from mastering the space you have. So let me tell you where the final method comes from, because this is the one I've been holding back, and it's the one I want you to try this weekend. During the Second World War, when materials were rationed and families were told to make do with what they had, the government and home economists actually printed and distributed housekeeping guides for tight, crowded living. In 1943, with so many things scarce and so many families crammed into small wartime housing, these guides taught a method for storing a household that I have never once seen in a modern organizing show, because you can't sell it. They called it storing by frequency and zoning by reach. Here's the whole secret, and it's so simple you'll wonder why nobody says it anymore. Most people store things by category, or worse, by wherever there happens to be room. The wartime method says, forget category. Store everything by how often you touch it, and put it exactly at the height your hand reaches for that frequency. Let me make it plain, because this is the part that changes your home forever. Picture 3 zones in every part of your house. The golden zone is between your shoulder and your hip, the space your hand reaches without bending or stretching. That zone is the most valuable real estate in your entire home, and it should hold only the things you use every single day. Nothing else is allowed to live there. Not the thing you use once a month. Not the sentimental item. Only daily use items get the golden zone. Above your shoulders, the high zone, that's for things you use now and then, the seasonal, the occasional, and the light. Below your hips, the low zone, down where you have to bend, that's for heavy things and rare things, the stuff you touch a few times a year. The wartime guides taught this because when you're tired and stretched thin, every unnecessary bend and reach steals your energy, and a poorly stored home wears a person down all day long without them even noticing. Now here is why this beats every expensive system on the market. It requires you to buy absolutely nothing. You already own the shelves and the drawers and the hooks. All you do is empty them and refill them by this one rule: frequency at the right height. When I finally did this to my whole place, the change was almost unbelievable. My most used things practically fell into my hand. I stopped reaching, stopped bending, stopped digging, and I found that I had far more room than I thought, because most people fill their best, easiest to reach space with things they hardly ever use, and banish their daily items to awkward corners. We do it exactly backwards. Think about your own kitchen right now. I'd bet the pots you use every day are stacked in a low cabinet you have to kneel down for, and the fancy dish you use twice a year is sitting right at eye level. That's backwards, and it's costing you comfort every single day. Flip it. Daily things to the golden zone at hand height. Rare things high or low. It takes you one afternoon and $0, and it's the closest thing to magic I've ever found in a home. The old woman down the hall knew this without ever reading the guide, because her whole generation lived it. She told me the things she used to cook every night hung right at her hand by the stove, and the big holiday roasting pan lived up top gathering dust till December. She never called it zoning. She just called it common sense that everybody used to have. And that's the truth of all of this. This was ordinary knowledge, kept alive in poor and crowded homes because they had no choice, and then buried under 50 years of catalogs telling us the answer was always something we had to buy. Poor households kept this alive when nobody else would. Farm families, wartime families, immigrant families packed into small rooms, the folks who couldn't afford to be wasteful. They passed it hand to hand, elder to youngster, the way that old woman passed it to me in a hallway when I had nothing, and now it's in your hands, tonight, for free. You hold the same knowledge that ran those tidy little rooms 100 years ago, and not one company could stop you from using it. Let me pull it all together for you, because I want you to walk away tonight with the whole thing clear in your mind. Store the air, not the floor. Use the vertical space above your head, the rail near the ceiling, the space over the door, the gap on top of your cabinets. Use the backs of your doors. Roll your clothes and stand them upright so you see every one. Turn your throwaway cardboard into dividers and your empty jars into a see-through pantry. Bend a free wire hanger into whatever hook you need. And above all, refill your home by frequency. Daily things at hand height, rare things high and low. Every bit of it costs nothing but an afternoon. I think about that little room sometimes, the one where I moved a pile off my bed every night just to lie down. If someone had shown me these old tricks the day I moved in, I'd have saved myself years of feeling crushed by my own belongings. Years of feeling like a small life was all I'd ever have. That's what I don't want for you. You are not a person with too much stuff and too little room. You are a person who was never handed the knowledge that used to be everyone's birthright, and now you have it. Here's what I want you to feel tonight. You didn't just learn where to put your pots. You took back something that was quietly lifted out of ordinary people's hands, the simple power to make a small space feel like enough. That's what these old poor folk methods really give you. Not just an organized drawer, but the dignity of mastering what you have, and never again believing the lie that you need to buy more room to live well. You're the kind of person who refuses to be wasteful, who looks at an empty jar and sees a tool instead of trash, who would rather learn the old way than be sold a new thing you don't need. That's exactly who this channel is for, and that's exactly who kept this knowledge alive through the hardest times this country ever saw. Now, I want to hear from you, And I want you to actually do this, because folks like us don't always speak up, and I'm asking you plainly. Tell me in the comments which one you're going to try first this weekend. Is it the rolled clothes standing upright in your drawer, or is it flipping your kitchen so the daily pots move up to hand height? Just type the one you're starting with. And tell me where you're watching from, because I like knowing how far this old wisdom is traveling. If any of this made you feel like you just got back something that should never have been taken from people like us, then come stand with the rest of us who are digging up these buried survival tricks one by one. Subscribe and you're part of it, part of a whole group of us reclaiming the know-how that a throwaway world tried to bury. Because next time, I'm going to show you the old way poor families kept food fresh for weeks, with no refrigerator and no electricity, a method straight out of the same hard years, and once you see it, you'll never look at your kitchen the same way again. Stay with me, and let's keep taking it back, one forgotten trick at a time. This video gave you the overview, but there's more. Inside the poor man's circle, I pick up right where we stopped and walk you through the full storage method. You can ask me your own questions, and a real person, me, answers you myself. You won't be alone in there. Thousands of thrifty folks like you already belong. Just point your phone's camera at the code, and you can cancel any time, no risk.